In the early part of the Second Spanish Republic, the Catholic Church gets targeted with violence by people who want there to be no church at all. Now, I explained in the last video that the Spanish Republic instituted a bunch of reforms to the government's relationship to the church. They removed the church as the official religion of Spain. They made it so that you could get married outside the church. They made divorce legal. They started to tax the church. They started secular schools. So they made a bunch of reforms, which I think a lot of the Spanish population would have been behind. They wanted the church to be reformed. I think most people wanted some reform. But there were people on the left who wanted no church at all. And so they attacked convents, they looted them, and they set them on fire. And people lost their lives. So I think that violence was bad, but the government's reaction to the violence was much worse. So the government said, when asked why the police who were on the scene didn't intervene, did nothing to stop the looters and the people who were setting these convents on fire, and they said, it is not worth one Republican life to protect the Catholic Church. Spanish people love the church. They wanted it to be reformed. They wanted it to be better. But these were the churches where they got baptized and where they got married and where their parents' funerals were held. They didn't want them burned down. And violence against the church would ultimately hurt the Republicans, so that in the next election, the conservative parties were able to win that election and take over the government. Now, it's important to note, and I think this is something that has echoes in our 2024 election as well, one of the reasons that the Conservative Party was able to win the parliamentary elections was because they targeted women voters. Now, the Liberal parties had given women the right to vote, and they foolishly assumed that because they had given women the right to vote, that women would then vote for the party that gave them the right to vote. That is not how it works. So the Conservatives targeted women voters, and they were successful. And a lot of people were convinced to vote Conservative because of the violence against the church. After the Republic failed and the Civil War started, the church backed Franco. They backed the rebels against the Republican government. And throughout the Spanish Civil War, churches became a target for the Republican armies. Because the churches backed Franco, the Republican armies would target the churches, and priests and nuns were massacred, churches were burned. There was a lot of violence and destruction targeted at the church. And I think ultimately that hurt the Republican cause because it looked bad. Even though they had some really good reasons to want to destroy the church, and even though the church was acting against them, I think it made them look, it was something that could be used to make them look bad. And honestly, it did look bad. I'm going to be real. It wasn't great. During the Franco dictatorship, the church was reinstated as the national religion of Spain. They were once again granted tax-exempt status, and they enjoyed that privileged position that they had prior to the Spanish Republic. This existed for a long time in Spain under the Franco dictatorship, but after the Vatican II reforms, the church started to slowly take a more critical role of the Franco dictatorship. As the world was liberalizing, the church was liberalizing, they started to actually speak against moves that the dictator would make. So by the time the modern era came around, the Catholic Church was once again taxed and started to have a relationship to the government that's more in line with the modern era. So yeah, to sum it all up, the church had an enormous role in the Spanish Civil War, and it could be argued that the violence against the church was one of the things that really brought down the liberal government of the Republic.